The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary, that familiar mix that usually meant comfort. But that evening, something about it felt off. I was stirring the sauce when I heard Ethan's keys hit the counter, followed by his tired but satisfied sigh. His steps sounded heavy, purposeful, almost like he wanted to be noticed. When he leaned in to kiss my cheek, it felt practiced, warm on the surface, cold underneath. "You've been staying late at work a lot lately," I said, trying to sound casual, though my stomach had already begun to twist. He flashed that proud grin, the kind men wear when they're telling half-truths. "Yeah. We've been assigned to something huge. Confidential. A top-secret project. Can't say much." He said it like it was a movie line, and for a moment, I almost laughed. "Oh, so now you're James Bond?" I teased. "Something like that," he replied, a smirk tugging at his lips, the kind of smirk that hides more than it reveals. We laughed together, but the sound felt hollow. When he turned away, I studied him quietly, the way his shoulders straightened, how his eyes darted to his phone like it was a lifeline. Something about him wasn't syncing with the man I knew. Later that night, while he showered, I found myself glancing at his phone on the nightstand. It was locked, but I saw new numbers, saved without names. And that's when the thought crept in. A secret project, or a secret life. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that he was just tired, stressed, or maybe trying to impress his bosses. But as I cleaned up after dinner, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, that perfect mixture of arrogance and secrecy. It didn't sound like Ethan. It sounded like a man playing a part. Every clang of a dish, every flick of the faucet seemed to echo his words. Confidential. Can't say much. And suddenly that little sentence felt like a wall he'd built between us. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming like nothing had happened, I tried to read his face. He smiled, kissed me again, and asked about my day, as if rehearsed. I smiled back, but inside, something was unraveling. I thought about the years we'd shared, the inside jokes, the late-night talks. When did those become scheduled? Rehearsed? I realized, with a quiet kind of ache, that it wasn't just his phone he was locking. It was himself. That night, when he finally fell asleep, I lay awake, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. My mind raced with questions that had no safe answers. If he wasn't at work, where was he? If this project was real, why did it feel so scripted? The shadows from the streetlight danced across his face, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the man beside me. The room felt colder, even with him lying there. The next morning, the air between us felt thinner, fragile, like glass waiting to crack. Ethan moved through the kitchen with his usual calm, but now every gesture, the way he buttoned his shirt, checked his watch, sipped his coffee, seemed too careful, too measured. I watched him the way one studies a stranger who used to be familiar. "Don't wait up," he said casually, grabbing his briefcase. I smiled, but my heart felt heavy, caught between denial and suspicion. When the door closed behind him, the silence hit me hard. I sat at the table, my coffee growing cold, staring at the empty chair across from me. For years, that chair had meant laughter, stories, plans. Now it felt like evidence, a symbol of absence disguised as routine. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the mind has a cruel way of replaying tone, posture, and timing until the truth begins to whisper through the cracks. That night, while he showered again, I looked at his phone once more, this time longer. Same locked screen, same new contacts with no names. My reflection flickered in the black glass, and I barely recognized myself. The trusting wife turned silent detective. I didn't open the phone, but I didn't need to. Deep down, I already knew. Whatever Ethan was working on, it wasn't a secret project. It was something far worse. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Familiar streets, familiar routines, but nothing looked the same anymore. Ethan left earlier than usual, always in a rush, always with some excuse about meetings or deadlines. When I asked questions, his answers grew shorter, his eyes sharper. It was like watching a wall rise, one lie at a time, between us. And the strangest part? He seemed to enjoy it, the thrill of having something I couldn't touch. One morning over breakfast, I tried again. "How's the big project going?" I asked, careful to sound curious, not suspicious. He didn't look up from his phone. "Complicated, high pressure. We've had to sign NDAs. NDAs? He loved that word now, as if it justified everything he didn't want to say. "Who's on your team?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Mostly new hires. You wouldn't know them." His tone was calm, too calm, like he'd practiced that line in the mirror. He kissed my forehead before leaving, and for the first time, I didn't kiss him back. I just watched him go, the scent of his cologne trailing behind like a ghost. I didn't feel anger yet, just confusion laced with dread, the kind that eats away slowly, one unanswered question at a time. But deep down, a quiet voice inside me was starting to wake up, whispering, "Find out." That afternoon, I couldn't sit still. The house felt too quiet, every tick of the clock tapping against my nerves. I needed answers, not excuses. So, I drove to see Melissa, an old friend who happened to work in the same company as Ethan. I told myself it was just curiosity, but my hands trembled on the steering wheel. When I got there, Melissa greeted me with her usual warmth, unaware that I was carrying a storm behind my smile. We chatted over coffee for a few minutes before I casually dropped the question. "Hey, have you heard anything about a secret project Ethan's been working on?" Her brows furrowed immediately. "Secret project? What are you talking about?" My heart skipped. I tried to laugh it off. "He's been saying he's part of a confidential team." But Melissa didn't laugh. Her voice softened, hesitant. "Laura, there's no secret project. We've all been on the same account for months. And Ethan hasn't been coming into the office lately." For a second, I just stared at her. I couldn't feel my hands. Couldn't even feel the cup between my fingers. Everything around me blurred. Her face, the cafe, the sound of people talking. It was like the world had gone muffled. I nodded, pretending to understand, pretending not to fall apart. "Thanks," I whispered, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Then I got in my car and drove home in silence, every mile heavier than the last. The drive home felt endless. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear it, just the pounding rhythm of my own thoughts. Melissa's words echoed like a bell I couldn't unring. "He hasn't been coming into the office lately." I replayed every excuse Ethan had given me, every late night, every urgent meeting. The pattern was suddenly clear, and it made my stomach twist. I'd been cooking dinner for a ghost, waiting up for a story that never existed. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked different, colder, emptier, like it had been quietly mocking me all along. I sat there for a long time before going in, watching the porch light flicker. Inside, I could still smell his aftershave, faint but stubborn, like a lie that refused to fade. I poured myself a glass of wine, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. My chest felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around my ribs and kept pulling. I kept asking myself, if he's not at work, then where is he? That question settled deep in my mind, burning slow and steady. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. The man sleeping beside me wasn't the man I thought I married. And if he was building a secret life, Then it was time I built a secret plan of my own. By the next evening, my fear had hardened into focus. I cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and that rosemary gravy he always bragged about at work events. I wanted the night to feel ordinary, to look like love, even if it wasn't. The candles flickered, throwing soft gold across the table. When Ethan walked in, his expression was unreadable. Surprised, maybe, but not touched. "You look tired," I said sweetly. "Another long night saving the world?" He laughed, the same hollow sound I'd grown used to. "You have no idea." I smiled and poured him wine, watching his hands, his eyes, the way he avoided looking at me for too long. "You must have so many stories to tell someday," I said lightly, just to see how he'd react. "Maybe in another life," he murmured, half smirking. His answers always came like riddles now, neat little lies wrapped in confidence. When he went to shower, I slipped into motion. Quiet. Careful. My fingers found his work ID inside his jacket pocket, the same badge he carried every day with pride. I logged into the company system using Melissa's link, my heart pounding. His badge hadn't been scanned for 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then, slowly, a calm I didn't recognize began to settle over me. The calm that comes right before the storm. That calm carried me into the next morning, but it wasn't peace. It was precision. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to confirm what my gut already screamed. I dressed simply, brushed my hair, and told myself I was just dropping something off. At the office, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the scent of routine, of people who actually had jobs to go to. My heels echoed against the marble floor as I approached the reception desk, rehearsing the lie in my head. "Hi," I said with my warmest smile. "I'm Ethan's wife. He left his wallet at home. Thought I'd drop it off." The receptionist blinked, uncertain, before calling over a man I recognized from company parties. Ethan's manager. "Ethan's wife?" he repeated, confused. "He hasn't been here since last month. I thought he was on sick leave." His words fell like ice water over me. Every sound in the room dimmed, phones ringing, printers whirring. All gone. I just stood there, smiling like a mannequin. "Oh, right. Must have been a miscommunication," I managed to say. My voice sounded far away, someone else's. The manager nodded politely and walked off, but I stayed rooted, clutching the fake wallet in my hand like a prop in a play I hadn't agreed to perform. When I finally left the building, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked to my car, sat down, and stared straight ahead. My tears would come later, but my revenge was already forming. When I finally pulled into our driveway that evening, the house felt like a stage. Every photo, every neatly folded blanket, every smiling memory now tainted by a lie. Ethan greeted me at the door, pretending everything was normal. "Rough day?" he asked, his tone syrupy, rehearsed. I smiled back, that same plastic smile I'd worn at the office. "You could say that," I replied, brushing past him. I could feel his eyes on me, searching, but he didn't see it. The quiet war already unfolding inside my chest. Later that night, while he typed away on his laptop, I sat across from him, sipping tea, watching. Every click of his keyboard sounded like a taunt. The glow from the screen lit his face in soft blue, almost angelic, but all I could see was deceit. I wanted to ask him where he really went every day. I wanted to throw the truth in his face, but not yet. No, I needed patience and proof. Revenge deserved precision, not impulse. When he finally went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen, staring out the window into the dark. The garden lights flickered, swaying in the night breeze. I breathed in slowly, letting the anger settle into something sharper, something controlled. He'd built his web of lies with care, but he'd underestimated one thing: the woman he lied to. I wasn't broken. I was becoming deliberate, and that made me dangerous. By the end of that week, I stopped asking questions. Silence became my armor, my smile the disguise. Ethan thought my calm meant surrender, but it was strategy. While he scrolled through his phone each night pretending to work, I was setting my own plan in motion. I ordered a GPS tracker online, small enough to hide beneath his car seat. When it arrived, I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from purpose. It was time to turn the tables. The first night I used it, I sat on the couch with my laptop open, watching the small dot move across the map. My heart pounded as it stopped, not at his office, but at a small boutique hotel on the other side of town. I stared at the screen for minutes, waiting for the map to correct itself. It didn't. That's when I knew, not suspected, not feared, knew. And strangely, I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, "All right then." From that moment, I moved like a different woman. I kept cooking, kept smiling, kept pretending to believe his stories. But behind those small acts of normalcy, a storm was gathering. Every lie he told me became a thread in the trap I was weaving. I'd spent years loving this man. Now I'd spend one weekend dismantling him. When the weekend finally came, I told him I was going to visit my mother for a few days. He barely looked up from his phone, just mumbled, "Drive safe," before disappearing back into his supposed project. That moment, his indifference, sealed it for me. I packed a small bag, kissed him on the cheek, and walked out the door. But instead of heading toward my mother's house, I drove straight to the hotel I'd seen on the tracker and booked a room under a fake name. The place smelled like perfume and cheap champagne, a mix that clung to the wallpaper. My room overlooked the lobby, perfect view. I sat by the window, curtains half drawn, waiting. Hours passed. The sky outside turned from gold to deep blue. And then, at 8:30 p.m., there he was. Ethan. Same shirt I'd ironed that morning, same smirk he wore when lying to me. But this time he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, confident, smiling, too familiar. It took me a moment to place her. HR, of course. I lifted my phone, hands steady as stone, and started recording. The two of them checked in, laughing, brushing shoulders. Watching it unfold didn't shatter me the way I thought it would. It clarified me. Every ounce of doubt, every sleepless night, every whispered excuse evaporated. What replaced it wasn't rage, it was clarity. Cold, powerful clarity. And that clarity deserved an audience. The next morning, I was already downstairs before sunrise, dressed neatly, calm as ever. I ordered coffee at the cafe facing the elevator, the perfect stage for my scene. When the doors opened, there they were. Ethan and his HR darling, stepping out like two teenagers caught in someone else's life. He froze the second he saw me. She went pale, her hand still clutching his arm. I smiled, genuinely, as if we'd simply run into each other at brunch. "Good morning, Ethan," I said sweetly. "How's the secret project going?" He stammered something, my name, an apology, maybe an excuse, but I didn't care enough to listen. "I'm sure you can explain," I said, still smiling, "but I'd save it for HR. I'm sure your boss would love to hear how you've been spending company hours." The woman's face drained of color. "Oh my God," she whispered. I leaned in just enough for them both to hear me clearly. "Oh, don't worry. I already sent them the pictures." Then I stood, smoothed my blouse, and left my untouched coffee on the table. Behind me, the entire cafe had gone silent, forks suspended, eyes wide. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Their humiliation was enough music for the morning. As I stepped out into the bright sunlight, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not victory, but freedom. and it felt better than forgiveness ever could. He came home that afternoon like a storm trying to rebuild itself. The front door slammed, his footsteps thundered through the hallway. "You had no right to do that," he shouted, before I even looked up from the book I was pretending to read. His voice cracked with panic, not guilt. "You ruined my job." I closed the book slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. "You ruined your job when you made up a fake one," I said, calm, deliberate, the kind of tone that cuts deeper than rage ever could. His face twisted, red with disbelief. "We can fix this," he begged, reaching for me as if a touch could rewrite what he'd done. "No," I said, stepping back. "I'm done fixing your lies." My words seemed to hang in the air, thick and final. He started pacing, running his hands through his hair like a man trying to find a door in a room that no longer exists. For years, I'd been the one shrinking to fit his stories. That day, I watched him crumble inside mine. When I finally stood, I walked past him and picked up a folder from the counter, neat, organized, merciless. "I already spoke to my lawyer," I said, handing him the divorce papers. "Don't worry, you can keep your little project. I'm working on one of my own now." His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, Ethan had nothing to say. I walked away, not out of anger, but out of relief. My voice trembled, but my heart didn't. He followed me into the kitchen, his tone shifting from rage to desperation. "Laura, please! You're overreacting. It didn't mean anything." I turned to face him, and for the first time I saw him for what he really was. Small, scrambling, terrified of losing control. "It meant enough for you to build an entire lie around it," I said quietly. He opened his mouth again, reaching for another excuse, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I warned. "Every word you speak now just digs you deeper." He sank into a chair, defeated, rubbing his temples like a man who'd suddenly realized the cost of his own arrogance. The silence between us was heavy, but it didn't hurt anymore. I'd already mourned the marriage, in the nights I stayed awake, in the meals eaten alone, in the smiles I forced. Now, there was only truth left. I looked at him and felt nothing. No hate, no love, no fear. Just freedom knocking quietly at the edges of my heart. When I turned to leave, he called after me. "Laura, can't we just start over?" His voice cracked on the word "we." I paused at the doorway, glancing back once. "You should have thought about that before you started your secret project," I said softly. "The one that never existed." Then I walked away, letting the sound of my heels be the last thing he'd ever hear from me in that house. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. No buzzing phone, no restless pacing beside me. Just quiet. Peaceful. Earned quiet. When I woke, sunlight spilled across the empty side of the bed, and instead of feeling loss, I felt lightness. The weight I'd carried for years, his lies, his moods, his endless explanations, was finally gone. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the small things again. The steam rose like a promise, warm and real. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he once told me about his top-secret project. Only now, that memory didn't sting. It amused me. I thought about all the energy he'd spent pretending, building a fantasy so fragile it collapsed under its own deceit. And I thought about me, how I'd believed, loved, doubted, and finally decided to end the story on my own terms. Revenge hadn't been my goal, clarity had. But it turns out, they sometimes look the same. As I looked out the window, the garden shimmered in the morning light. The air smelled of rosemary again, just like that first night, only this time there was no lie attached to it. I smiled, realizing I wasn't angry anymore. He'd lost his job, his pride, and his illusion of control. I'd gained something much greater, my peace, my independence, and a plan for what came next. Because I wasn't done rebuilding. My new project had just begun. Months passed, and life began to bloom again, quietly, steadily, like a garden after a long frost. I moved into a small apartment with sunlight that poured through the windows every morning, the kind that made everything look a little more possible. I started my own marketing consultancy and called it Project Truth. The name felt poetic, not about revenge anymore, but rebirth. Every client, every meeting, every new opportunity was a reminder that I hadn't just survived Ethan's lies, I'd transformed them into fuel. At a conference downtown, I ran into Melissa. She looked relieved, almost proud. "You won't believe this," she said, lowering her voice. "Ethan's been blacklisted from 3 firms. No one wants him." I smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Good," I said softly. "Maybe now he'll finally have time for his secret projects." We laughed, not at him, but at the absurdity of it all. For the first time in a long while, laughter felt light again, untainted. That evening back home, I opened my journal, the one that had become my sanctuary, and wrote, "His lies built a fantasy. Mine built freedom." I closed it gently, feeling an ache that wasn't sadness, but closure. My reflection in the window looked older, stronger, softer. I raised my glass to the quiet, to endings, to beginnings, to every woman who's ever turned betrayal into a blueprint for her own liberation. The real project wasn't about exposing him. It was about finding me.